let me turn the microphone and the next panel to Professor and Associate Dean Cheryl Holcomb, Associate Provost Cheryl Holcomb-McCoy.
Thank you. It's hard to follow, Khadijah. That was wonderful. It's hard to follow that. Good afternoon, first of all. It's my pleasure today to serve as moderator of an extraordinary panel on trauma-informed schools. As we've heard this morning, nearly half of all children in the United States are exposed to at least one social or family experience that can lead to traumatic stress and thus impact their healthy development. As you can see in your packets, there are several different ways in which kids they experience stress. It can stem from witnessing community violence, experiencing violence in the home, having a parent or family member die, or living with someone who abuses alcohol or drugs. All of these events can increase a child's risk of negative long-term health consequences or of falling behind in school. And research even suggests, and we heard this morning, that 75 to 93% of youth in the juvenile justice system are estimated to have experienced some type of trauma in their lifetime. And we also know that chronic exposure to trauma can adversely affect memory, attention, and cognition, as well as interfere with problem solving and planning. And within the context of schools, chronic trauma symptoms also can lead to low achievement, underachievement, absenteeism, and disciplinary problems. For Baltimore, like other U.S. cities, the stakes are really high, particularly when it comes to schools, given the population density and the large pockets of children who live in high-poverty areas where violence and other trauma-causing events may occur. And if these traumatized children are not helped, they are more likely to struggle to maintain jobs, turn to violence themselves, and or need mental health services, which is not easily accessible or available to them. So given these dire consequences of trauma on children, it seems very fitting that more attention be directed at schools. And as a former school counselor and kindergarten teacher, I know this oh so well, that schools can become the space for trauma interventions. And this morning, I have the pleasure, and we all have the pleasure, of listening to experts who are going to tell us about trauma-informed schools. These are schools where programs are implemented in them to help children overcome traumatic life experiences. These schools are led by committed administrators who provide a safe environment and work from what I call a strengths-based model or framework. A unique aspect of trauma-informed schools is the educators' reframing or the shifting of thinking from what is wrong with this child to what has happened to this child, and ideally, what steps can we take to support this child. So we're going to hear from a panel of experts, and I'm so excited to hear them today. All of them have worked, again, within trauma-informed schools, or they have provided research that can be utilized to assist students who have experienced trauma. Throughout their presentations, we will hear three distinct themes. And in my conversations with them, these themes really did evolve. You'll hear about the implementation of evidence-based interventions within the framework of schools and the complexities of managing the effects of trauma within schools and school districts. You will also hear about the importance of relationship building, and more importantly, the building of safe relationships where students feel respected and there's an overall school climate of generosity and respect. And then thirdly, you'll hear the need for universal social-emotional competence that's embedded in schools. In addition to this, the panelists will talk about some of the things that you've heard about this morning: policy implications and also the effect of trauma on the brain's development, a growing area, an exciting area of research. So first this afternoon, We'll hear from Susan Cole, who is the Director of the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative, a joint program of Harvard's Law School and the nonprofit children's rights organization, the Massachusetts Advocates for Children. At Harvard, Susan holds a joint appointment in the Education Law Clinic, and also she's a lecturer on law. And she's a senior project director at MAC. Christopher Blodgett, we'll hear from him this morning. He is the director of the Child and Family Research Center at Washington State University, and Dr. Blodgett has been working on issues of family violence most of his career. We also have Tamar Mendelson, who is an associate professor here at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she is currently evaluating mindfulness-based and cognitive behavioral approaches for improving emotional and behavioral outcomes among urban, middle, and high school students. And lastly, but not least, is Godwin Higa. Godwin is the principal at Cherokee Point Elementary School in the City Heights neighborhood of San Diego. His school has been recognized by the Huffington Post as one of the few trauma-informed schools in the nation. And I asked Higa before I said this, he said this is still true, the statistic. His school has had 0 suspensions and expulsions. Wow. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of them, and I'll turn it over now to Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Holcomb-McCoy. That's a wonderful introduction. I'm delighted to be here. As she said, my name is Susan Cole, and we're from the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative. I put the website right up here. You can check it out because a lot of what I'm going to say is up there, and you can download a lot of information for free there. I'm glad for you to do it. Okay, so who are we? We're as Professor Holcomb-McCoy said, we're a partnership of MAC and Harvard Law School, and our mission is to ensure that children traumatized by exposure to family violence and other adverse experiences succeed in school. We'll tell you a little more about how we do our work. We run a law clinic at Harvard Law School where our law students work with experts representing very vulnerable families where children are struggling in school and there's an element of trauma. And we do this to learn how the institution is impacting our most vulnerable families, not the ones who come to coalitions and speak up and so forth, but we want to know that. And then we have the other foot working directly in schools. We're running that, having demonstration schools and learning from schools as much as we can, because we believe that it's the voices of families and students, like the 2 students we've heard today, and the voices of educators coming together to speak at the policy level that will really help us move the policy forward to support schools to be able to become trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed. So we're really looking to encourage those 2 voices to get louder and louder as we spread this across the country, the kind of work you're going to hear about today. These are our 2 books, and like I said, you can download them for free, and there's a lot of not, woo. We read the research derivatively. The research has tended to fall into three categories as it relates to school. The trauma can impact learning itself, the learning process itself, as well as behaviors and relationships at school. The third point is that trauma-sensitive schools, trauma-informed schools can actually help students learn, as well as behave and have better relationships. That trauma sensitivity, the fourth core point here is that trauma sensitivity requires a whole school effort. It has to be part of the way we run the school here. It has to be woven into the everyday activities of the school. This isn't about identifying a few children, because they're not a few children. It's about recognizing the need for a culture change where everyone feels safe and supported. And the last, and I want to talk about this, is we believe that this is a major issue for education reform. I want to talk about that a little bit today and tell you our work in it, because did I divulge that I am a lawyer. Now, these are sort of the three areas: scientific research, ed practice, and policy. I'm a lawyer, but I'm a former teacher, and a lot of my work grew from what I experienced as a teacher. So, of course, number one, we know this. These are the numbers. I'm not going to go over them again. There are a lot of kids in the classroom, right? So let's just move on. But, you know, one thing that's important to understand is that trauma is a response to an adverse experience. It's not the experience itself. And, of course, as we learned this morning, everyone brings a different proclivity to it and different kinds of supports in their lives. But one thing to remember is that no two children, even in the same family, are necessarily going to react the same way. And this causes a lot of confusion at schools, which we'll talk about later. So here's the three areas that we saw the research falling into. So when we think about academic performance in trauma, we have to recognize that trauma can impact, not necessarily, but it can impact the core skills children need to learn. In terms of narrative, for example, it's so important to be able to think in terms of a narrative, because reading is about a narrative. Letters, one letter goes after the other, one word goes after the other, paragraphs have to fit together. But as we learned this morning, one of the first things that can be impacted, depending on how severity the traumatic experience is narrative. Well, think about how that plays out when you have a kid in front of you that is really having a hard time identifying with the characters in the story, tends to be more instrumental in the use of language, because maybe that's how that child learned to use language. It doesn't sort of jive with the kind of things we're trying to teach when we go to school. Sequential organization is essential, and also understanding cause and effect relationships. You can't really understand Tolstoy unless you understand cause and effect, and that's an area that can really be affected. So those are sort of core foundations for learning, but also trauma can affect the ability to get work done, and you've all seen kids who come in with executive functioning issues, having trouble setting goals, developing a plan, carrying out a goal. I mean, oftentimes what trauma can do is really interfere with hopes and dreams and wishes to move forward, and a real belief that you can sit down and organize a paper and it will make sense and it will be something others can read and listen. Transitions are really hard for a lot of traumatized, because just as they're getting comfortable in that high school classroom, you know, they walk in, they sit at the back, nobody's bothering me, I feel a little bit safe. Then the teacher says, get your work done, and they've missed the directions. And then just as they're starting to get going, the bell rings again. So these are some of the ways to give you a sense of the way trauma plays out at school a lot and every day. And we've all, heard about how the behaviors that can result, but perfectionism is just as common as, a lot of kids who are perfectionists would rather act out than be caught showing the teacher they can't read. We see that over and over and over again. Or we see the kid who's very functional and just ends up under the radar. But a lot of this, dissociation plays out in staring out the window and getting yelled at in school. So there's many ways that children, the educational system just doesn't fit with trauma sometimes. And of course, relationships. The lack of trust, is so critical because everything in education reform says it's all about a solid relationship between an adult and a child. And it's very hard sometimes to form a relationship with a child who might be pushing you away, but who needs you more than anything. And this is when we talk about having the time to really listen to a child. But all of these other aspects that we really don't have time to go into today can really interfere with forming relationships. And remember, if children don't have relationships with a caring adult at school, they're not likely to succeed. That's been proven. But also, it's been found that children who don't have friends are likely to drop out. And so relationships with peers is just as important to think about and how trauma can impact that. So one of the big public policy issues that happens at school is this misunderstanding between what the student's thinking and what the adult's thinking. So what we see a lot, and this is because we do cases and we're in schools and we're trying to resolve issues all the time, the student might be saying, well, danger's everywhere. I must always be vigilant. This is the child who's hypervigilant. He's just not paying attention. He's smart, but he won't try. I'm sure you've heard that over and over again. We have. If I'm perfect, I'll protect my parent. Well, that's the good kid, but still hurting. And the child who needs to feel that they're in control to avoid danger can come across to an educator as defiant and aggressive. And this is where we get into these tussles and the whole issue, you think, well, a child who's having trouble with trust would draw in the adult, but not necessarily. Sometimes adults feel rejected too. And that happens in a busy, busy school. So what do we want to do about this? We call it, by the way, a trauma-sensitive school because the term trauma-informed came from the mental health side. And when we think about all the amazing work that comes out of mental health and dealing with attachment and all the deep kind of therapy that goes on, we wanted to convey to educators, you don't have to be a therapist. You are a teacher. We want you to help kids go on to be successful. But we need to learn to do it in a more relational way, in a more, trauma-sensitive way. So it doesn't matter what you call it, but this is where we came from in our work. So here's the overall definition of what we would say a trauma-sensitive school, right, where, trauma sensitivity is woven throughout the day and all students feel safe, welcomed, and supported. But let's get a little more detailed about what that might mean. What we found in our work is, at its core, leadership is critical. It's really very hard to create a trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive school unless leadership are on board in a very large way. I think you'll see as we talk more in detail what that means certainly at Cherokee Point School. But everyone needs to share an understanding, and that means we're talking about the cafeteria workers, the lunch, the hallway. Everybody in the whole environment needs to share an understanding, and the need to work together. So you've heard a lot about how safety plays an important role. But when you think about schools and you're setting up a trauma-informed environment, when you think about safety, it's not only physical safety. It means you have to feel safe enough to make a friend, safe enough to take a chance on a relationship, that the teacher's there to really help. And that's huge in terms of work that needs to be done to help kids feel that way. Emotionally, so they can learn to control their emotions, but academically too, because you have to feel safe in order to take a risk with your learning. No, and like in the perfectionist world, it might be, I'm going to get everything right. But is that really, is that child really able to engage in a learning process? It means being able to raise your hand and find out you don't have the right answer. And that's not safe in every classroom, but it needs to be safe in a trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed school. The third piece of a trauma-sensitive school is that we need to support students' needs in holistic ways. And what we found in the research and through our work is that we need to be supporting students in their relationships. That what the research told us was that in the education world, if you want to help students overcome adversity and go on to be successful, and that's different from, a therapeutic experience, but in school, you want to help students go on to be successful, we need to support them to have relationships with caring adults and with peers. We need to support them to be able to self-regulate their emotions and their behaviors. All the behavior isn't necessarily going to be externally motivated. It's going to be internally motivated. And that makes behavior modification not always work for every kid. And then academic competence is critical because a feeling of competence works back together with relationships and regulation to be able to create a whole child. And this is, in addition to supporting children physically and in their mental health needs, is a way to think about the whole child. So in a trauma-sensitive school, you want to support the whole child. And here's 4 ways, 4 pieces, 4 words that can help you work together and get out of some of the mumbo-jumbo. Right. Connecting a student to the community. And you want to think about this when you're thinking about services in a school, that the school has, for a child to feel safe and successful, they need to feel part of the school and connected to the school. It's known as school connectedness. And we have to be careful that the services that we provide don't pull kids out, that they can be, I think we're going to hear more about how some of these whole school approaches weave services in a very sensitive way. And that's so important because the last thing we want to do is marginalize any child, as you're the child with a mental health problem, you're the child with 100 ACEs, you're the child with trauma. It's really about you're a kid with dreams and hopes, and we want to connect you to the community so you feel a part of it. These are students who have often not engaged in the community, and they need to re-engage, and we need to help them do that. Now, a trauma-sensitive school has to embrace teamwork, because this is all about creating a trauma-sensitive community among the adults that can then hold all the children. So a lot of our schools aren't trauma-sensitive environments for the people who work there. I was a teacher for many years, so I know that well. But teachers have to feel safe. They have to feel safe to take a chance, to have a new idea. They need to be supported, and they need to, they also need to work together so that they can figure out a way to have the time to listen to children, as Jonathan Cazole suggested this morning. And it's a kind of a trauma-sensitive school is one that can anticipate and adapt. I was with Higa this morning. He said he's got a whole new ethnic group that's coming in next year. Like, he's looking ahead and he's adapting. He's getting ready to adapt to the needs of that new culture that's going to enter his school. And so it's about being more proactive than we tend to be. So I don't... So to do all these things, we've learned from the literature, that strong community support can reduce the severity of symptoms. So what we say, schools are really a great place to create this kind of safe haven that can help children go on to be successful. And so why? This is an argument that I don't think anybody here needs to be told. But in a whole school environment, we don't marginalize anybody by virtue of what happened to them, and we're never going to know who's been hurt and who hasn't. So we want to create these whole school environments that weave services into it. Okay, so here's where you have to stop me if I go on too long, because we work at the policy level a lot, and what we have found is, you might have a leader like the amazing leader you're about to hear from today who can do it on his own. But in terms of looking at this as a public policy matter, we've found that it's very helpful for educators to have a framework to help them weave trauma sensitivity throughout the day so it doesn't become a sideline program. And so these 6 elements, which in Massachusetts have been codified into law, are 6 elements that are good to keep in mind anytime you're thinking about how to make a school trauma sensitive. Remember that leadership is going to be absolutely critical. It's just not possible to create a trauma-sensitive or informed school, I believe, without a good leader. And not everybody's going to be sensitive to this, but we need to think about that in terms of who's picked to lead schools. That professional development is going to be critical, and we've seen schools partner with universities, we've seen schools partner with local experts. It's not impossible to find that. It's something that has to be continuously refreshed. But think about access to services. The services in the community and there has to be a lot of work to reach out to community partners. But actually how those services interact with the school is a great challenge. It's one of the greatest challenges I think schools have in terms of, schools sort of do it their way, the service people do it their way, and how these are going to interact is important. Also, how you bring your services together with the whole process of learning is critical. And one example is how often in schools you have the mental health system over here and you have the discipline system over here. And it really should be one referral point where nobody should be suspending a child without knowing what their clinical information is. But that happens all the time. So this is a kind of a systemic way to look at the school, to look at all the elements and all the elements of school operations and bring them together so that you can weave trauma sensitivity into all of them. Don't try to do it on just one side program. Think, mindfulness is a great example. If the principal understands it and brings it into the school, if they connect it to PD, she's telling me, but also think about how the services are going to fit into it too, because not all kids will be able to sit, and focus, and they're going to need help. And that's why this is all about teamwork. It all has to be brought into the classroom as well, and all throughout the school. So I think that I've probably taken up time, but let me just end with the question we ask at the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative is, what role can policy play in setting the conditions for good holistic practice, which is what's needed here to support the whole child and to create a whole school culture that's trauma-informed. And we don't think you can't force trauma down anybody's throat. You can't say, I'm going to hire you and you're going to become trauma sensitive if you don't want to be. We're going to have to work with people who have a feel for it or who can be brought along. So rather than say, okay, we're now going to make all our schools trauma sensitive, we're going to go to the federal government and do that. What we're saying is, if we set the conditions for practice, if we give schools the time and educators the time to sit around the table and some tools for how to change school culture, that we can set the conditions into which trauma sensitivity can flow and flourish. That's okay. I don't know how to just shut this. So, all right.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Chris Blodgett. I'm from Washington State University. I've been working on this issue of how do we actually work with universal systems, not to have a mental health solution except when appropriate, but really to deal with the issue of how to teachers, how to early childhood learning professionals, how do physicians actually start to integrate this in practice. But you've eaten lunch. It's now 1:40, so I'm going to invite you to stand up if you choose to. Okay. How are we doing? No, I don't. No, we're good.
But I don't want this to shut off.
Okay, thank you.
Because the people after you do.
Okay, so now if I get your attention back while he's working on the AV side of this, I'm going to actually have you place your, thanks, stretching is good. I'm going to have you place your hands on your stomach, and I want you to take 3 breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth, slow. I want you to keep standing because the rest of my presentation is actually going to be done through interpretive dance. So I want to, no, you can sit down. So, we have these terribly challenging conversations about the awful things that happen to people, but basically we are built to survive and we're built for joy. And we have to keep remembering that at the center, and particularly when we're working with children, we have to keep that at the center of what we're doing. I'm going to make a challenge statement to y'all. I believe I'm going to be right with this. With rare exceptions, everyone in this room is a trauma survivor. The reason why I'm bringing this up, there's actually what we know. What we know about what works with adults is that we end up seeing that by the time you reach into your middle 30s, you've ended up surviving 4 to 5 major significant life changes that changed you. And these are large ticket issues. It's the death of a loved one. It's being a victim of violent crime. It's having a life-threatening illness. Any one of these issues. The reason why I wanted to start with the short time that I have with you today is we need to talk, as we talk about trauma, language does matter here. So I'm going to come back on that on a couple of issues. Trauma is now being appropriated into a different conversation, but trauma is something we all know. So the question now is, what makes this a different conversation? In Washington State, we're in one school district and likely moving into another where horrific things have happened. So we are in one school district which is the home of the Oso landslide, which occurred a year ago. If you remember this, this is when one side of a mountain let go, and 43 people died. The second school that we anticipate we're going to be starting to do some work with, although it's not finalized, is called Marysville School District. And Marysville is where a young man walked in and shot dead 3 of his best friends, 2 of whom were his cousins. And that happened now about 6 months ago. This is a story that is told over and over and over again. So one way that we need to understand trauma when we're talking about living systems like schools is that one place where trauma has to be addressed is about horrific acute events. And the good news is we actually know what to do about that. And in every community there are people who have skills that can be mobilized to be able to address this. I believe that the more fundamental question that we're talking about, though, that is pervasive and we have to keep our focus in, not to dishonor the first 2, but to remember where we are, is the consequence of living with accumulative adverse childhood experiences and what that does to the developing brain. But navigating these conversations and getting ourselves appropriately where we need is really important. David Finkelhor and his team published in 2012 a study that was a household survey of roughly 5,000 households across the United States, and they asked questions about the experience of youth and children of violence. And what they found was in the past 12 months, as they interviewed either the children or their parents, was that 6 out of 10 of the children had experienced at least one form of meaningful violence. Things that, if brought to the attention of police, would have led to some sort of action. But the power for me, because that's actually old news, was they then said, if this happened to you, who in a position of responsibility knew. And it was less than half of the folks that had had a child who had experienced violence ended up saying that someone in a position of authority happened, that when it happened that somebody knew. When they then asked who it was, what they found that only 3% of the families ended up responding saying it was primary health care. Less than 25% said it was law enforcement. 75% said it was school personnel. So when we start to look at our systems, two things to take away from this is most of this is out of line of sight for most of our systems. So we don't have good community conversations about this when we go through exclusively our formal systems. The second is that we need to go where the conversation is occurring, and the evidence is it's occurring in schools. In Darrington and Marysville, on this issue of the acute trauma, what I can tell you is the common conversation. In both of these communities, independently, what they ended up saying is that as horrific as what happened to us as a community is, what this has done is stripped away the facade that we had as a community about what is multi-generational problems. And that our recovery certainly is about traumatic grief, but it is more fundamentally, it's about the issue that we have to look differently at who we are as communities. So in this conversation, what I want to really do is I want to stress that there are absolutely reasons why we should have hope. And that our responsibility as professionals and as parents is to instill hope as our first duty. So as we look at this, here's what we know. What we know is that we repair, that even in the face of terrible things, we can come back if we're given the opportunity to come back. We also know that as important, my training is as a clinical psychologist, that as important as therapy is, that very few people actually access therapy, but that healing occurs in natural relationships, and we can have faith in that, but it puts a tremendous responsibility on each of us to be there, to be that caring and decent person. What we end up seeing then is small changes can make great differences. So none of us in doing this work have a firm answer for you of exactly now what it is that we should be doing in schools, mostly because this is too new. We've been at it for really between 6 and 10 years, depending on the team that you end up talking to about these issues. Talk a little bit about what we do. What we believe is that this is a 3 to 4 year change process that schools have to agree they're going to take on. That we believe the first year is about literacy. It's about coming to grips with these issues. So we do a strong professional development structure, but for the educators in the room that get worried about what we're talking about with that, I will tell you what we do is we do 1 hour of professional development once a month, and we do it over a 2-year period to unpack what is best practice recommendations. We don't do it as the principal intervention. What we do it is to build literacy and to create conversation, to create the opportunity to be invited into classrooms and into conversations with teachers and principals and others about what they're doing differently in their practice. What we do is that we then work on unpacking skill sets that are associated with good trauma practice. And this comes out of the mental health treatment literature about where you deal with this. I haven't got very much time today, so I'm not going to highlight many issues, but I'm going to hit a couple. One is the issue of the use of ritual and routine in order to create predictability, in order to create safety. So you can see a sequence that follows with this. So I'm going to give you a very practical issue. Many of the educators in the room, you may already be doing this, because what we've learned is we can have great faith in the skills of educators. So this is not an issue about deficiency, it's an issue of refinement and filling in some gaps when gaps are something that honestly we end up having to deal with. But rituals and routine. Rituals are the celebrations that you do. It's the way that you call out, validate, and confirm. Routines are the things that you do to build predictability and safety into space. So a routine would be a greeting routine that happens every single day. That in the schools we work, we're in 15 schools right now across Washington State. Teachers stand at the doorway and they greet the children as they come in every day. Not the first day of school, it's every day. It's a touch on the shoulder, it's a handshake. It is instantaneous, it takes just minutes. A routine is doing a variation of check and connect, for those of you familiar with that term, where you end up having 10 minutes spent saying, since I last saw you, did anything important happen? And it's an opportunity to be together, to share, and to have the relationship be at the center of the work that we do. So one thing there is it creates relationship. The second is that it creates a sense of safety in the rhythm of how you build days. What we end up finding is that actually we buy back instructional time because this re-regulates kids with very, very simple interventions. What we've done is really focused on the issue of what happens in the classroom and what happens in the teacher-child relationship as the foundational basis. But what we know is somewhere between 10 and 20% of kids do need more intensive interventions. So things like school-based health clinics, mental health in school practices, community coordinated care are all part of the continuum. They are not a substitute for the fundamental shift that has to happen. Because what we know about access to care, even when schools are the largest mental health treatment system in the United States for children, that what we end up seeing is access to care for kids with significant and persisting mental illness is less than 10% under the age of 10 and no better than 15% into adolescence. So we cannot, as important as mental health services are, count on this as the solution. What we need to recognize is it's part of a continuum of response. So what can you do tomorrow that would be different from today? The first thing is stop and put relationship on purpose centrally into what it is you do with each person that you meet. I travel a lot. I was in my hometown and I was in the bathroom and the janitor came in and I broke the pane. And I went up to him and I said, I want to thank you for keeping this bathroom so clean. I travel all the time and I can't tell you what a gift that is. He was stunned, didn't talk to me, until 10 minutes later he came into the waiting area and he came up to me and started talking to me. We've got to break the pane. Relationship is done in very, very small steps. Everything that you can do to offer a sense of respect, courtesy, and safety to another person is a small win against these issues. When we talk about social emotional learning, we talk about resilience. The classic article on this, the title was Ordinary Miracles. And what we know is that this is not about big transformational change. It is about small, intentional, progressive steps. Our belief in these 3 to 4 year efforts is that teachers and other personnel in buildings, including the people who serve lunch, the bus drivers, need to have the opportunity to practice differently and to reflect on their practice. And that's what takes the time in this conversation. But let me end with that because we believe this is fundamentally a hopeful conversation, that each of us have the power to actually be able to do something differently. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? What a great crowd. It is such a pleasure to be here today. And what I want to do today is really to give you a flavor for what mindfulness-based intervention approaches look like and how they might be really helpful to integrate as a component of trauma-informed schools or trauma-sensitive schools. So I want to talk a little about what is mindfulness, why should we bring this to urban schools, and then give you a couple of examples from my work of different kinds of programs that involve mindfulness pieces to give you just sort of a flavor, as I said. So first, let's just take a breath and take a brief moment to check in with yourself. It's been a long day. See if you can just get curious about what's happening in your body. Do you notice any tensions, any pain, any tightness, any comfort? Just get curious. And now check in with yourself inside. How are you feeling? What kind of thoughts are you noticing? You may feel sleepy. You may feel inspired. You may feel overwhelmed. What are you feeling? Just take a moment to get curious. And you can notice whatever's there with a kindness. Whatever's there is okay. And now, if you can turn your attention back, I want to talk a little bit about what is this buzzword, mindfulness, that we've been hearing so much about in the media. Right? So John Kabat-Zinn, who's sort of very instrumental in bringing Eastern contemplative practices to Western medicine, has defined mindfulness. Mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So mindfulness is not sort of a mystical hocus-pocus type of thing. It's really attention. It's about paying attention and being curious. But there's more, too. Mindfulness is about paying attention. That's what meditation is, no matter what tradition or particular technique is used. In Asian languages, the word for mind and the word for heart are the same. So if you're not hearing mindfulness in some deep way as heartfulness, you're not really understanding it. Compassion and kindness towards oneself are intrinsically woven into it. You could think of mindfulness as wise and affectionate attention. And I think that heartfulness is a very important one as well. And I don't know how many of you, when checking in with yourselves just now, might have noticed judgments, but that's a very common part of the fabric of what happens in our minds. And being more aware of those judgments and learning to have an attitude of compassion towards oneself and others is a real cornerstone in developing that aspect of emotional connectedness with oneself and with the world. So why bring mindfulness to urban public schools? Research with adults and now increasingly with children is showing that practicing mindfulness actually builds the capacity to regulate difficult thoughts and emotions. And this is true not only for yogis who have spent 10 years in the mountaintops, but for novices who have had really brief exposures to training. And this is one of the reasons why these kinds of practices are gaining more attention and can be very appealing. These capacities to be able to kind of modulate when you're really angry or upset and you're having really difficult thoughts, these are so critical for all kinds of aspects of our lives, and particularly for kids as they develop, right? So you need these skills in order to pay attention in class and to have good relationships with peers and with teachers, and to be able to make wise decisions in terms of, should I try drugs? Which kinds of kids should I hang out with? So the hope here is that mindfulness may be able to reduce some of the negative effects of chronic stress exposure that we've heard a lot about, and actually promote effective skills for managing stress and really promote resilience, and have the potential to reduce or prevent these downstream problems that are really common among kids growing up in traumatized communities, like depression, social and behavioral problems, academic problems, and early substance use. The kind of programs that I'm going to talk about today are not treatment-focused, they're prevention-focused, and they are health promotion-focused. They're also strength-based and aimed at building resilience. And they're meant as universal programs, meaning that children don't need to be screened for a particular exposure or type of symptom, that these skills should be beneficial for children in a trauma-sensitive environment. So this is one program that colleagues and I have worked with. We adapted this from a group treatment for adolescents exposed to trauma that's called Structured Psychotherapy for Adolescents Responding to Chronic Stress. This is a mouthful. It's called SPARKS for short. Some of you may be familiar with this program. And there's a a long story about the adaptation, which I don't have time to talk about, but we used community-based participatory methods. We worked with the Youth Opportunity, or the YO centers in Baltimore, which provide job training and education for youth who have dropped out of high school. And we adapted the intervention to be prevention-focused and to include workforce development, because groups are co-led by 2 young adults who are members of Youth Opportunity Center and a mental health professional. And while the groups began in that setting, we had a positive response, and we then adapted them for upper middle school students. So the groups are 12 sessions. They're integrated into the school day. They're co-led by a mental health counselor and a young adult community member. And there's a mixture of components in the program, including psychoeducation about stress and trauma, mindfulness skills, and also cognitive behavioral skills that focus more on making positive changes. To give you a quick flavor of some of the mindfulness skills in the RAP Club program, becoming aware of emotions, doing check-ins with yourself, longer than the one we just did, but somewhat similar. Finding enough space of quiet to be able to check in and identify thoughts and emotions. Learning how to use wise mind, which is a way of integrating emotions and logic to make choices that are going to be the most beneficial. And tolerating distress. So when you're so upset but you can't do anything about the situation right away, how do you hold that without making the situation worse? We did a small pilot randomized study and found that there were improvements. Teachers who were not directly involved with the program saw improvements for kids in their ability to regulate emotions, in their social competence, classroom behavior, and academic competence. And kids who attended more sessions had better outcomes. And we're now looking for ways to expand this program so that teachers can potentially deliver it, or possibly school mental health folks, in the context of the classroom, again, to try to integrate, as other speakers have mentioned, more into the whole school. Another program I want to talk with you about, or rather a set of, these are more than one program, but this is the Holistic Life Foundation, or HLF. I've been partnered with them since 2007. I put their website up here so that you can check it out. They are doing tremendous work. This nonprofit was started by Ali and Atman Smith, who are brothers, and their colleague Andy Gonzalez. And they work with folks of all ages, and now they work beyond Baltimore, but their passion is really working with Baltimore City youth who have grown up in situations of trauma. And before I go further, I want to show you a brief video clip to give you a flavor for the kind of work that they do. This clip is from 2011, so it's not their most recent, but I think it's a good size to give you a sense of the work they do. Yeah.
Our Making a Difference report tonight is about a group of guys who returned to the neighborhood where they grew up, and they're helping the kids who live there find peace of mind in a way you might not expect. NBC's Rahema Ellis has their story from Baltimore.
They were asked to coach Pee Wee football, but Andy Gonzalez, along with brothers Ali and Atman Smith, had another idea.
Chin up and exhale it out.
Yoga, offering an extraordinary experience to Baltimore kids who know nothing about inner peace.
I think there were 4 shootings in like a 1 weekend period.
Shootings in the neighborhood where the Smith brothers grew up and learned yoga from their dad.
It wasn't what we left, you know, when we left the neighborhood to go to college. So when we came back, we saw a need there.
There you go.
9 years ago, they formed the Holistic Life Foundation, a nonprofit offering free yoga classes.
We got the kids that had all the behavioral issues, anger management issues, emotional issues.
They started with 15 students. Now they've taught more than 1,000.
How many inches in a foot?
Away from the yoga mat, these men are tutors and mentors. They've even gotten kids who once destroyed property to help build this neighborhood park. There haven't been a lot of studies on how yoga affects kids, especially inner city kids like these in Baltimore. But early findings show this kind of exercise is helping kids manage their stress.
When someone wants to fight me, I start to do deep breathing. I just start breathing so I can calm myself down.
One volunteer, Darius Douglas, said he fought every day until he started doing yoga 10 years ago.
If I didn't have Ali, Atman, and Andy, I probably would be somewhere on the streets selling something I shouldn't be selling.
If the kids that we help are getting older and seeing that they need to give back too, then I really feel like we're doing a pretty good job.
Stretching bodies and teaching kids the value of learning to exhale. Rahima Ellis, NBC News, Baltimore.
Okay, so Holistic Life worked in schools leading mindfulness and yoga, and we did evaluations of that work where they integrated this within the school day, and these are the kinds of things that would happen in each session. The kids would come in, they would breathe to settle in, then they'd do a bunch of active yoga-based poses, which I can tell you was really important that they started with that because these were really active 5th and 6th graders and 4th graders in some cases who were bouncing off the walls with energy at the beginning so that they do the active movements. I think it's a very grounded way to get kids to pay attention to their bodies, to their breathing. Then there were also breathing techniques. Discussion was woven throughout. What is stress? What stresses you out? How can you use your breath when you're stressed out? And the end of each session would be 5 minutes where kids lay on their backs on their yoga mats and had a guided practice in terms of following the breath, sending positive energy to somebody, or thinking about using the breath to go in and take a test, and really thinking about the kinds of situations that the kids were in at school and how they could visualize doing these practices in them, and assigning children homework of practicing different poses and breathing techniques and teaching a family member or a friend. So that's what that looked like. And the workforce development piece here is, as you saw in the clip, the Holistic Life Foundation has a number of assistants, and many of these are young people who themselves had been students as children and have come back to help teach, and they're really working on expanding that training and workforce opportunity piece. I don't have time to go into detail about the evaluations that we've done. We've now done 2 randomized studies with different dosage levels, but I do want to give you a few of the student comments after having been part of the program, and these are student voices from the second study that we did. 5th grade female said, like, if sometimes I don't want to fight them, I'd be just calm yourself down, just sit down and move away from the situation. That was a very common type of reflection that students had, was how it helped them to handle anger. 5th grade female said, I get to learn new stuff and I get to learn about new things and stuff to help me in life when I grow up, like when I'm a young adult or an older, like in my teens, or when I'm getting ready to do something that I know is not the right choice and I have a way to calm me down. And a 6th grade male said, I could use program skills in the future because when you get older, more things will happen. So you will get more stressful and you'll think life is like over. So you might want to learn yoga before that happens. Before I end, I just want to say that there are many ways of integrating these practices within schools, and the Holistic Life Foundation is now focusing on whole school approaches that involve teachers and administration as well, that include brief daily mindful practices across the whole school using loudspeakers in the morning and afternoon, teacher trainings, and optional yoga for teachers. I can say that having been doing this work now for a number of years, teachers want to be involved, and a key challenge is how to do that in a way that doesn't add more to their plates, but really helps them to have an aspect of self-care and understanding for what the children are learning. And we still need to do much more evaluation of this Mindful Moment program, but preliminary data indicate that after the program was offered at Patterson High School, the whole school approach, suspensions decreased, attendance increased, there was an increase in the number of 9th graders promoted to 10th grade, and the average 9th grade GPA increased. So these are all promising indicators. And I just want to acknowledge lots of people and schools and funders who have helped with this work. And this is my daughter when she was younger attempting her first yoga poses. Thank you very much.
So Godwin has asked that we cue his video up before he speaks. So I think it's very fitting that we're going to our last speaker, our last panelist is Godwin Higa, who is a principal in San Diego, and we get to see his school in action. And then he will speak for a few minutes. Mm-hmm.
Trauma unit at the hospital, you know, not realizing that trauma is deep inside your brain.
Do we fight at recess?
No.
Do we respect our teacher?
Yes.
Does the teacher respect you?
Yes.
So this is a very special school because last year we had no suspensions. Did you know that? I did not send anybody home. Understanding the whole child, where they're coming from, how we treat students with respect is the trauma-informed philosophy. It's about relating to the students and really opening your heart. This is more than just making a crane, isn't it? It's like teaching you how to be friends and how to help each other.
Trauma-informed school is a school that's all about coming from a point of compassion and looking at the whole child and really looking at what can I do to help this child with the things that he or she needs.
Pues una escuela informada sobre el trauma es una comunidad que está abierta a aprender, a compartir sus historias. Es una comunidad que puede salir adelante, que puede formar niños sanos, niños felices, niños contentos.
The big message is we cannot continue to be punitive in education.
Are you enjoying school? Yes. Oh, good. That's the main thing.
Instead of asking students what's wrong with you, we need to ask our students what's happened to you.
Y el informarte sobre el trauma, vas más atrás bueno, el niño es así, pero ¿por qué? ¿Qué está pasando en sus casas? ¿Qué está pasando con su familia? ¿Qué está pasando en su entorno? Y cuando conoces esas historias detrás de esa persona o del trasfondo de esas situaciones, te hace más sensible.
We have many homeless students. Most of our students are English learners. There's a lot of domestic abuse in our community. When they come in and they sit down at their desks and they have their breakfasts and they watch an educational video, they know they're safe here.
I'm from a family of domestic violence, and I was 2 years old, and I remember the ball hitting the wall. Your little kids that you're dealing with right now, they will remember what's happening.
y tal vez su mal comportamiento es un grito de ayúdenme.
We want to make sure that when you're angry or sad, we want to help you through that.
I thought, are you guys friends?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you have to remember, friends don't fight. Friends are nice to each other, right?
Yeah, okay. Okay.
I think the most important thing that we can do is sit and talk to each other. Instead of continuing to get in trouble and ending up in our jail systems, they know how to deal with the controversy in their life.
Y el demostrar que el drama no te puede tener para nada. El amor, la comprensión, siempre va a ganar y a triunfar para vivir mejor, vivir una vida feliz.
What are we doing as educators? Are we really understanding where our students are coming from? It really makes me passionate about the trauma-informed school setting. The goal here is to make policy changes. Look at all the birds coming alive. We can make the change. You can make the change. I know deep in my heart that this is the way to go.
Thank you very much, everybody. I don't care what Prince William says, but can I do a selfie with all of you? I want to take this back and tell my kids how popular they are and what great job they did, okay? I want to start off with a short activity that really tells a lot before I go into all these informational. Some of you got this sheet here, and all it is 3 stick figures that I had my little second graders draw. And these are stick figures with smiley faces. You can duplicate this at home. I didn't bring 800 of these because it was too heavy in the suitcase, but I brought some of these. But what I want you to do, and you can do this anywhere you work or schools. I did it with my parents and all that. So let's try this together real quick. What I want you to do is if you have this paper, and look at the paper with all the smiley faces on it, I want you to crumple it up. And as you're crumpling it up, you remember the beginning of the video, it said all these hurtful things that students experience. So as you're crumpling this up, I want you to say that to the crumpling paper. How ugly you are, the things that you hear people talking about other kids and other adults, and crumple it up really tight and make it really tight. Now what I want you to do is to unravel it. And I want you to say all these beautiful, wonderful things that you hear people saying about each other. And as you're unraveling, I want you to try to take all those creases out. Try to iron it on your knee, and just keep on doing that. And what you're going to find is the faces are still smiling, but you see all those creases in the paper? That's what happens to children and adults when they're traumatized. It will never go away, but we need you and we need professionals like what you see here to find preventions and interventions to help the students go through these times. And it's so important that you do this activity so that people can see the impact of all these little creases that's scarred in their brain. Okay? Another thing that I wanted to, before I start, did you know that the #1 suicide rate in the United States is ages 45 to 65. The second is 85 years and older. And the third are adolescents from 15 to 24. And guess what the reasons are for kids killing themselves? The sense of hopelessness. So we have a big job here to do. We have something that we can do. It's not hard. It's opening your heart, opening your knowledge about trauma and what the effect of trauma is, and we can save a lot more kids. I was a principal at a middle school as well, and that is the age group that we really need help in. So if we can help these kids, and I'm thinking to myself, what about all these people before 45, before 85, and before 15? Can we capture those people to make them realize that there's hope, that there's professionals that can help you go through these hard times and heal your trauma that you experienced through your childhood and adulthood? So please remember that. I want to talk a little bit about the school. It's a Title I school, 100% free lunch. Most of the majority of the people are under the poverty line. It's a pre-K, third grade special ed, 3 years old to 5th grade. This is 85% second language students. This is our second year of no suspensions. And thank you. The no suspensions came about as a cultural shift, a climate shift. One of the things that non-negotiable for the school, I've been at this school for 7 years, was all adults would treat students with respect at all times, and students would respect adults. And the non-negotiable is you're not going to be mean-spirited to the kids, and it works. And how do I do that? Thank you. When a teacher is mean-spirited, when an adult is mean-spirited, like I'm working with my cafeteria workers, but I go and visit them constantly, and I monitor their behavior, and we do write-ups, and we do things that will stop them from treating kids mean. So that's one of the things that changed the culture of the school. So if you notice that these are just a few teachers that were filmed. There's a 15-minute video online on the California Endowment and the conference today that tells a little bit more, and there's more teachers and families talking about the school. But the school itself is in the mid-city area of San Diego. There's a lot of violence. There's poverty, child abuse, domestic violence. Mid-city, where Cherokee Point reside, is the highest domestic violence in San Diego. So we do a lot of domestic violence training for parents and adults, and the teachers also go through domestic violence training. And there's a lack of access to physical and behavioral health care. Cherokee Point and the City Heights residents have experienced a lot of acute, chronic, complex, and system-induced trauma. The priorities at Cherokee Point as a trauma-informed school is to support. So we help children regulate emotions in order to master social and academic skills, maintaining high academic standards at the same time, helping children feel safe, managing behavior and setting limits, reducing bullying and harassment, helping children build a sense of control over their environment and emotions, building on strengths, understanding the connection between behavior and emotions, and avoiding labels. Some of our goals that we're still working on, and we have accomplished many, increasing the capacity of residents of Cherokee Point neighborhood and to shape culturally relevant health initiative to support the families in the area, increasing capacity and opportunities for youth and parent leadership, systematically implementing practices that support a positive climate and culture in the school, increase access in-home and self-based health services for Cherokee Point family in the community. But we needed a lot of partnerships building, and you can do this in any community, any school. The partnership that we have is California Endowment, work with the District Attorney's Office, GAN Commission, Human Relations Commission, City Council. The Superintendent of the school is all for this. The County Board of Supervisors, San Diego Police Department come and read to our kids, and we open the door to all of these services, and also the universities, USD and San Diego State University. But most importantly, We want to increase access to in-home and school-based health services for the families. That is a biggie, because students will come to you with trauma, or adults will come to you with trauma, and there are many times where teachers say, well, what do we do next? And the answer to that is increase access to healthy homes and create sustainable in-home and in-school-based behavior wellness response team that supports our children, family, and the community. So we have a wraparound service. We just visited a school this morning, and one of the big question was, how can we duplicate some of the things that we're doing? And one of the things that will really help is opening your door as a school or an organization and seek help. There's so many people that want to help once they hear what trauma-informed means and what we're doing as a community and hopefully a nation, that they will come. We have 20 student nurses that come to Cherokee Point, 10 on Mondays and 10 on Fridays, and they work with the classroom, with the teachers, with the families, with the students. We have a School of Psychology students there. We have the Child Development students there working with pre-K and kindergarten students. And one of the big things that we did with the University of San Diego State was I asked them to have the professors come to the school and hold classes at the school so that the students don't have to fight for parking, for one thing, but to really be part of the community and work with the community, work with the parents and so forth. So that's really successful. And lastly, in July, San Diego State University found that this is such an important topic and also something that we need to promote. We started practice trauma-informed self-care credential program. We're starting that in July, where we're going to open it up to anyone that want to learn more about trauma, learn more about restorative practices. So that's a credential program that we're going to start in July. I have 2 books that I started this school with. And this is my favorite. It's called If She Only Knew Me. And this is a wonderful book. It's only $5. You make a deal with them. But the teachers loved it because they know that this is not how they are. And let me just read one part here. If she only knew that I get really upset when Leonard talks about my mama. Her biggest rule would be no talking about other people's mama. If she only knew that I had to watch my little brother last night while Mama was at the park with her friends, she wouldn't have punished me for not getting my homework done. And it goes on about what adults and education systems do to kids. I made friends with the author of this book, Jeff Gray. He was a principal at one of the schools somewhere in the United States, but now he's in South Africa with his own school with a trauma-informed philosophy. So it's a charter school there, and he emailed me and he says, you know that kid on the cover? That's not his real true story, all the things that happened to him, but he's now on a full scholarship at the university somewhere. So we're really pleased with that. The other book for middle school is Don't Forget Francis with Jeff Gray. And this is about a student that we tend to forget in the middle school years. That's the hardest year for students in education. And this is a story about Francis that's being forgotten. And one of the biggest things that we tend to forget is when we forget kids in middle school, especially when they're so vulnerable, they will find better friends, and their better friends would be. She struggles with the pressure of the neighborhood, and she's leaning towards joining a crowd, and the crowd is a gang. So we need to address the needs of our students and really promote what we're learning today. And I'm hoping that with 500, 600, 700 of you, we can help the education system and the healthcare system by you being proactive when there's initiatives and when there's people that want to change policies. I'm hoping that you're there for us because it's a very lonely place right now, and we can use all the help we can get. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Godwin. Wonderful panel. We have a few minutes for questions. Okay, I have one. Okay, I have one. This is a question for the panel. Are uniformed school police helpful or harmful in creating trauma-informed schools? And this person says, I ask because we see schools reducing suspensions but not referrals to juvenile justice system, especially for kids with learning differences. Would someone like to take that question? Are uniformed school police helpful or harmful in creating trauma-informed schools?
I'll start to encourage everybody else to address the question. It's what's the role of the officer in the building? If it's essentially for the issue of the safety, then it can be a tremendous resource. If it is about the issue of carrying forward the problems that exist between police and the community, and it just is a microcosm in the building, then it's not going to add anything to what we're dealing with. And certainly, I think the consistent thing that you've heard from us is that it's the responsibility of all adults in all roles to be part of the solution about creating safety and relationship for children.
Would anybody else like to answer? Any other? Okay. This is a question for Godwin Higa. What are the implications of your approach for how you treat teachers and for school reform efforts?
At first it was very difficult, but I just asked the teacher, the principal at the school that we visited, about if we're allowed to select our own teachers. And I think what's happening right now is when teachers are not buying into something like this, it becomes peer pressure. And other teachers are going to start tattling on them, like, oh, he's yelling at the kids again. And so when that happens, there are rules in the Board of Education set evaluation rules where one of the main evaluation criteria is creating a suitable and learning environment. And when teachers are mean and screaming and yelling at students, that's not a suitable learning environment. So I'm sitting in the back of the classroom daily to watch and monitor and also mentor the teacher, bring the teacher in, we talk, and we try to figure out strategies that we could use to become a better teacher and treating students with respect. So yes, it's a very long road. It's about 2.5 years to dismiss a teacher in San Diego, but I know that this is the way we need to work, and I know that this is something that's going to start happening in the school district.
No, I know part of the question was about education reform, and I firmly believe this is an issue that has to get on the table. In education reform, how we do it is really critical. It has to be done by people who understand what the Cherokee Point School is all about. And I think the challenge is in the way things get translated at the federal level into lists of compliance, that we've all got to, that a movement has to happen out of which policy will change. That if families and students speak up and educators can speak up and we can get on the same page, we can push for the time and resources for schools to create the kind of whole school environments, because this is not a cookie cutter thing. How it will look in Malden, Massachusetts will be different than how it looks in San Diego, and that's fine. It's all about the values that have been espoused. So please work together and join our coalition. If you go on our website, we're trying to create a policy momentum, and we would love to have you join in.
Great. And one last question, and I think this is for Tamar, wondering about suggestions for mindfulness curricula or trainings for K-8 levels.
I'd be happy to put people in touch with Holistic Life Foundation since they have developed curricula. There are also other programs happening. There's work in Oakland around mindful schools. There's work with very young grades happening in Madison, Wisconsin. So there's pockets of work happening. If people are interested in that, I'd be happy to give more information.
Great. Let's give them a round of applause. What a wonderful panel.